Do you think Frozen would have been successful if it came out any other year, like before 2013 or after 2013?
So I don't think that it's kind of a complicated question because I don't think that it could have, or I don't think it would have come out before 2013. If it had come out before, like especially if it was during the Renaissance or even like from 2000 to 2010, I think it would have been written a completely different way.
Yeah.
It probably would have been closer to the original story. We might have seen like a real Prince Charming. We wouldn't have seen the central relationship be about two sisters, be between Elsa and Anna. Like, I think it would have focused way more on the romance and true love part of the story because that was what Disney focused on a decade or even 2 decades before. And it was only by virtue of coming out in 2013 and the world changing a little bit, Disney becoming a bit more adapted to the times, which is why it is about a central relationship between two sisters.
Yeah. I also think that we had to kind of grow up a bit. I mean, of course, Frozen is also aimed towards younger children, but I think the world and the audience surrounding Disney had to grow up a bit and really sit with the fairy tale because as we talked about with Disney Renaissance, the princess had already changed. They were no longer just trapped. They were also able to take things into their own hands and they were able to do something, and that was change already in the Disney world and the Disney princess world. And I think if Frozen was the exact same story and was made or released anytime earlier, it would have just been so odd and people just wouldn't have been able to connect with it. I think people needed to actually sit and like really think about or even subconsciously acknowledge the fairy tale tropes, the Disney princess, what Prince Charming is like, and all of those different things before we could even start flipping what Prince Charming is and what a Disney princess means. And so it's almost like you needed to understand what a fairy tale is before you could flip the fairy tale. So it's a bit of a hard call if Frozen would have been as successful if it was released later than 2013. But I think definitely I agree with you. Before 2013, it probably would have either been written a different way or it might not have done as well.
Yeah. So first we see with Tangled, like the Prince Charming is not like he's not a prince. He's not really what we would expect out of a prince, but that central relationship is still the most important part of the movie. And then with Frozen, we see the Prince Charming. He's a prince, but he's not charming at all, and he's actually the bad guy. So we see a real change between those two films.
I also just... go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious about, like, what we'll see in future. Like, will Disney ever go back to a central romance as, the main feature or subject of a movie? Like, will they ever go back to that? Or are they like, okay, we're done with love at first sight. We're done with true love's kiss and all that?
Yeah. I also just think that we're talking about like 2 decades worth of film, and I'm wondering what happens in between. Like, Disney Renaissance was in the 90s, and then this Disney Renaissance is in the 2010s, and now of course like 2020 bleeding into 2020. But I'm just wondering, is there a generation in between from 2000 to 2010 that didn't have that much Disney in their lives? Like, imagine that. Because we grew up in the 90s, so of course, like, we would have had the Renaissance original, not the Renaissance.
OG.
Well, I mean, your sister grew up in that time, didn't she? So what did she watch?
She still watched all of the originals when she was growing up, but I think she relates more to the newer ones, as I do, but I don't think most people my age do. But certainly those who were born after us, I think that they would relate more to the newer Disney films. And, you know, we've heard that some kids now don't even like the originals, and they find them scary, and they only like the live action remakes.
Yeah.
What if they do a Frozen live action remake?
What, and get Kristen Bell and Idina Menzel?
No, they'll have to have younger actresses.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's a part of me that just loves animated films so much that I think already I have that bias against a live action, because I think there's so much charm in animation and I don't want it to ever die out. I don't want Disney to stop making animated films, if that makes sense. And I'm so glad that Pixar exists, that DreamWorks exists, that there are so many studios that create films for this genre, because if there isn't animated films, then I think we'd be missing something.